ThomasDeHartmann was a Russian composer born in the Ukraine in 1885, died in 1956. By the time he was 11, he was studying with the composer Arensky, one of the major composers in Russia. It's still known today. He very quickly became known as a composer in Russia. By the time he was 21, his ballet, The Pink Flower, was performed in front of the Tsar with no less than Nijinsky, Fokine, and Pavlova in the cast. And on the strength of that, he was given a dispensation from his military service, and he went to Munich to continue his musical studies. He wanted to work with the conductor Felix Mottl. And instead of becoming aligned with the musicians, actually he became aligned with the painters of the day, and he became a very close friend of Kandinsky, close friend for life. Hartmann writes that he had become convinced that his composing, although he was very successful as a young man, that in order for it to grow, quote, his inner life also had to grow. He began to look for teachings which would help him to develop inwardly. In 1916, he meets Gurdjieff. Gurdjieff was the answer to what he had been looking for. Gurdjieff brought to DeHartmann a scientific approach to exploring his inner world. Sometimes there are rituals that are indicated, sometimes there's work with the heartbeat, sometimes there are different states that are available that can be described with this music. And this was almost like an opportunity for Hartmann to develop this musical vocabulary, which later became the basis of all the later composition, which established what I call a unique sound world. He spent 12 years with Gurdjieff between 1916 and 1929, and he went into isolation. He no longer composed any music in his classical style. He lost connection with all of his friends from the outside world. And when he went back to the music world in 1929, he began to compose again, but it was only limited. His contacts were limited to a few very famous composers who actually had some of his music performed. Musicians like Jean-Pierre Rampal, like Pablo Casals, like Paul Tortelier, the cellist, like Marcel Moïse, who was one of the great flutists from France. But his music never took hold. And he was even advised by Pablo Casals, who was one of his big supporters. He tells ThomasDeHartmann, don't pay any attention to your Parisian colleagues. Compose on your own in your own style and dare to be yourself. So it was at this point that Hartmann really began to develop his own personal sound world. And he began to incorporate sometimes ideas about the spiritual search, the music of the East, Western music, along with bitonality, impressionism, jazz, all these different elements, but always joined together in some way to describe in some form, fashion, or shape this connection between sound and man's inner world. This music was not well accepted when he composed it. It didn't have something that was fitting into the classical music world of the 1950s. I look at this music open-mindedly, and which after most of my life of working at it, I have found that there is something in this music which is of high value. Right now we've been involved with a recording project which began less than a year and a half ago. We actually began to record this music in Holland with Gert-Jan Blom, who's the artistic producer of the Metropole Orchestra. The aim has been to bring this music to the public in a comprehensive way, so that we have been recording now. We have 150 minutes of music, and we want to record enough music so that, to use Gert-Jan's terminology, it can be dropped like a rock in the musical pond. 5 or 6 CDs which will come out more or less at the same time, and which will give the music-loving world an opportunity to hear many various aspects of Hartmann's output.